sit right in front of staff and to block their view.
I'd like to welcome you all back for the second session of this three-part series on cultivating caring community. Yeah. Does everybody want me to use this? I can't use my classroom with my teaching voice. I'll do this until I get tired. Just fine. Anyway, welcome. And again, I'd like to thank the Adult Ed Committee and Dale and Marcia. And yes, Dale.
Nice, sir.
I'd like to thank Dale for making this introduction.
My name is Dale Sorensen, and I'm delighted to be with you here today. I wanted to share a Pope Leo story, but then I realized I had one closer to home. I'm married into a Catholic family, and my mother-in-law lived in the retirement center, and she had a sensitive question to ask her priest. This is a true story. And so one day when he came to visit, as he did once every week, and he visited everybody else in the center of the parish, and she said, "Father Larry, why is it that I'm always the last on your list?" And she said, "Is there a reason?" And he said, "Yes, there is a reason. I know that if I see you last, I will walk out of the building walking on air, and my day will be good." So, we're here today under the leadership of Mark Smiley and Phil Price to see if we could do the same thing for each other.
That's lovely. I'm going to put the camera on for that. That's a real keeper. But yeah, thank you very much, Dale, and thanks to Adult Ed. I want to thank Phil also for being a wonderful partner in developing this series and for helping to lead it. And those of you who were here last time recall that we have 3 sessions. The first one, we dealt with the question of why should we care about caring, and we'll get a couple of takeaways today. Today we want to focus on what it means to be a caring community. And what we'll do is we'll take that idea of caring community, look at each word separately, and then look at them together. And we'll start making a pivot toward what it means to be a caring community in very concrete terms, right? We'll try to get past abstractions and start going concrete, which will be very helpful for reasons that I'll explain in just a moment. And then next week, the last session we have, we'll address the third question, that if we can figure out what kind of caring community we really want to be, how do we cultivate it? Okay, so that's kind of the arc of the series. Let me do just a quick recap of last session, and then I want to turn it over. Oops, I went backwards, didn't I? Oh no, too far ahead. And then I want to turn over to Phil for part 2 of his piece. But these were just some of the things we talked about last week in response to the question, why care about caring? So we spoke about caring as sort of a moral imperative and intrinsic good and the key to the human condition. It's associated with all kinds of positive individual and collective outcomes, if you remember some of those. We also spoke a good bit that the alternatives to caring really aren't all that acceptable to us, right? And that we also can't make the assumption that caring is present, say in a school, for example, or a church, because some folks assume that just because it's a school or a church, caring naturally occurs. It's sort of an assumption of spontaneous caring. We kind of shook that up a little bit last week. We also said that we should care about caring because we say it's important, right? It's been a long-standing priority of the church in our ministry outlines, in our strategic plans. It's been front and center for a little while. And indeed, remember the exercise we did last week? It seems to be really important in your own words as well. And as promised, I went back and made sense of those index cards. And I put together 2 word clouds. Do you all know how to read a word cloud?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look up here, you can see the words that you all put, remember, two sides of the card. One side was positive, what caring does for you, how it makes you feel. The other side of the card was what non-caring does for you or makes you feel. This is the caring side. The bigger the word, the more frequency you gave it. Okay, so the word like love is pretty darn big. That means a lot of you wrote that word down on your card. I want you to just kind of get a sense. This is beautiful. This is a really good reason why we should care about caring, right? Would you agree? It's pretty cool. Let's look at the other side of this. Non-caring. What's the big word that jumps out to you?
Lonely.
Lonely. Sad. Unimportant. Unappreciated. Invisible. I like klutzy. I mean, that was like, you see it down on the kind of the bottom right? Anxious, dissatisfied. Well, look, if you had a choice about how people here should feel, which word cloud would you pick? First or second?
First.
Oh, well, duh. Of course we picked that one. Yet another reason we really should care about caring. And we should work not just to kind of get to a point where we can say, okay, that's enough caring, but this, as we'll learn, is continuous work. That's why a little jump ahead to next week, why I love the word cultivation. And the agricultural metaphor is that cultivation never stops, even after you harvest the crop. Right? Cultivation is a continuous, ongoing way of making something grow, develop, and be better. Okay? That's next week. Okay? Now, Phil introduced us to one of the most important reasons we should care about caring. And we've called this, or part of this series, the call to care. And last week he spoke with us about the one God who cared, right? And we get to that point in Scripture and in sort of our theological understanding to the one God who cares. Today, Phil will speak a little bit about caring in the commandments and in the voice of the prophets. Next week, this segment will wrap up with caring in the words and actions of Jesus and Paul. So let me turn it over to Phil for a couple minutes here.
First of all, thank you to Adult Ed and all of you for giving the church and me personally a chance to jump into this idea, this topic, because it has helped me do a deeper dive into what I always thought I know or knew, but now I see it in a completely new and clearer way. So thank you. At this point, there's simply no question in my mind that caring itself is the essential bedrock of our whole faith and our God story and our sense of self as religious people. Caring itself. And from the very beginning, just as we have as a church have struggled, we've named it many times, but it's not easy to live into it. Our whole faith story is about how hard it is to live into that understanding of ourself related to the divine. It's a hard and kind of sad story. We show up in history and awareness and consciousness as human beings, basically saying what's going on. Looking around, what is going on, and how can we thrive and survive? And so we figured out really quickly that the powers that be, the powers that shape how we experience, are arbitrary and capricious. That's our place in nature. The mountain that shakes and spits fire does not care that our hut's in the way. Does not care. The river that decides to expand its boundaries doesn't care that our crops and flocks it simply doesn't care. And so then how do we position ourselves in that world? Arbitrary and capricious power. Well, we decided that maybe these powers will listen to us when we cry and plead, or sacrifice our children, notably our firstborn, right? Maybe that'll get their attention and they'll say, So, we have tried various ways of worshiping / sucking up to these powers, like, please, or we have tried to find ways of saying, well, maybe if we can get these powers on our side and they'll work for us, then we'll have advantage over those people who we hate and we're fighting for that kind of thing. So, worship and war gods became our first ways of dealing with the powers that be. Are you tracking with me? That's just the human experience, the human story. Then it shows up, and this is just a review of last week, this God, a no-name God, a God without a portfolio or identity, in other words, no specific area of concern, no name, says, I care, I have heard the cries of a bunch of slaves. Never before in the thinking of God had a God ever showed up to say, I care about slaves. Slaves were always the group of the people that the God lost the war, and those people were taken into slavery. And no slave group would ever continue worshiping the God who lost the war. You see how it works? I mean, we talk about the cemetery of the gods. It's all the gods who lost the wars, right? Okay, so if they win, you stick with them. If they lose, who needs them? That's just the deal. That's the deal with the gods. New, radically different story. A no-name God, no portfolio, cares, that big word, about slaves. And that sets the tone for our whole faith story. It's not transactional. There's no benefit to this God caring for slaves. Just simply cares. And let's set it in distinction. Sometimes you see something by seeing what it is not. The other model of understanding about how it works and the gods is the dominance model. Powerful gods, powerful people, you win wars. That's the relationship. That's the order of reality. It came to its peak. It's a theology, dominance theology. It came to its peak in Rome. Rome viewed the world in a specific way, and I lifted this in internet searching. Every relationship, from marriage to political alliance, was based on the dominant patron and the submissive client. It was simply known, as much as you know anything, that that's simply the order of reality. That's how it works. And it was the strongest witness to it was in the family home, the male dominant leader, the father in the home, and every other relationship was the submissive client down the line. That's the order of reality. In our world, what is the most disgusting, sort of horrible, no one would question it, thing a person can do? If we had time, it would probably boil down to sexual abuse of a child, right? That's just absolutely disgusting and against anything, anyone, right? I mean, that would just be, for those Romans, that wouldn't have been it. It would have been someone, particularly a son, who broke that deal, the dominant and submissive client, a son who did something to the father. That was just against everything that was known. Right? It was just baked into reality. So it was called Roman pater familias. It was simply the order of the world. And then into this story, exactly at the same time, this other story, this other faith story, had its representative of the other way. Right? We're going to jump into that next week. But and you might guess who that is. But it's interesting that both of those systems and ways of looking at the world arrived kind of at the same time. The caring of this God, this power the no-name, no-portfolio God who cares about slaves, is expressed in three main ways. Number one, covenant. Think of it, covenant. Not that I'm just more powerful and have dominated you. That's the other one. Covenant, an agreement between two equal parties based on mutuality, not dominance, mutual respect, free, without coercion, entering into relationship. That's where ours starts. Think of it. Completely different than the dominance model. And then laws. There's order. But the laws are rooted in care. Laws that reach toward the most vulnerable. Caring, it turns out, is kind of like a virus. It wants to spread. It wants to catch. It wants... and in these laws, it was interesting that they spread. They wanted to reach beyond what is just natural to care. I mean, it's natural to care for your own baby, right? I mean, it's natural to care for your own, those who you identify as an extension of me, identity groups and so on. That's just natural. There's no brownie points for that. It's when caring extends beyond those to the quote-unquote stranger in the gate, the refugee, the foreigner, to the slave. And then it didn't even stop there. This sense of just caring that can't be stopped extended even to animals. There's specific laws. I don't know if you know this one, but there's specific laws. You don't harness an ox and a donkey together for a plow. Have you heard that one? You just don't do it. It's not fair. It's not fair to the donkey. It's not fair to the animal. So you don't do it. That's a law. That's how far caring goes. There's a law about what to do when you find a nest. Wild bird nest. You don't disrupt the nest. That's how far this caring goes. Now, it allows you to take the eggs, but you don't bother the mother. But, it's kind of, that's how far it goes, this caring thing. It just extends. The prophets, there's another one. Exodus 23:11. On the seventh year, you're supposed to even let the animals rest. The donkey, the ox, the plow, beast, they get a year off. There's no business reason to, it's just because you care, right? And it extends even to the earth itself.
Remember Genesis is a sabbatical?
Yes, of course. You get a year off, just to rest, just because we care. No other reason for it, just because care. The prophet's job was to remind us of the story. How many times does it say, remember that you were once slaves in Egypt? And this is hundreds of years later, so you weren't. It's talking to people who were never slaves in Egypt. But you're called to remember. You're called to identify with them and to try to remember, to pull in how it felt to be a slave, how it felt to be a nothing, how it felt to be just a function, all that. You remember that, and it'll affect how you treat others. Your caring is based on what it felt to be at the bottom. This is our faith story. The prophets railed at us at some time, because this caring thing is hard. Railed at us for forgetting this story, calling us unfaithful wives, calling us whores, because we've gone after these other gods, the gods of dominance, the gods of fertility, all that kind of stuff. The language is of this God who is beside himself, herself, with this people who won't honor this caring relationship. The question is, how can you not, and this God who pines and longs after this relationship, can a mother forget her nursing baby? The gods of dominance don't ask that question, right? The God who aches for this caring relationship I think I'm done, but I would love to, let me just put this in terms of the choice. The paradox or the moment that it is seen when the people didn't choose, they were caught on the line between the dominance model and the caring model, was King David. Because King David certainly lived into the warrior king model. He was also the one that was thought of as the shepherd king. So many of the prophetic things compare to God as the one who wants to be our shepherd, the one who cares. And so in David, we see both warrior king and shepherd king. And then I'm going to jump into it next week, where Jesus as Messiah had to choose. Is he going to be the Messiah in the order of David, warrior king, or Messiah in the direction of shepherd, talking about shepherd and sheep? I'm going to stop and let the expert continue bringing us into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. That was great. And we look forward to next week to continue and to wrap up this very interesting part. So as we get started on trying to address this question of what does it mean to be a caring community, I do want to say for those of you who were not here last week, much of the content of what I provide comes from a number of years of work that we did across a variety of disciplines: philosophy, ethics, sociology, political science, all this sort of stuff, and the human service professions, to try to get into what caring is, how it's practiced, how it manifests in organizations, how leadership can promote it. We did it for a number of years. Now, we went into this work thinking, oh, caring, piece of cake, we all know what that is, right? No, not so much. We don't, the word's used all the time. My hunch is that, how many people we have, if we did those index cards again, and I asked you to write just a brief definition of what caring is, we come up with, let's say there are 25 people in the room, we come up with 31 different definitions. Because I know that the company's going to write 2 definitions. So, let me say one other thing. As usual, I tend to overplay it. So we're going to let this work go today about as long as we can, and we'll pick back up at the beginning of next week. I have some things I'd really like to engage you in. Hopefully we'll have time today. If not, that's where we'll pick up next time. Okay? So, I'm going to skip to here. And I would like to say something about why I think it's important for us to come to terms with definitions, and indeed go from definition to kind of what does that mean in practice? What's the kind of concrete manifestation of a meaning? Kind of how do you know it when you see it? Unlike you all know the quote from Thomas Stewart in Jacob Ellis versus Ohio in reference to obscenity, which is, can't tell you what it is, but I know it when I see it. We'd really like to get past that when we think about caring, because that's really hard to develop if you can't articulate what it is, right? Another one is, less is not always more. This is sort of an architectural thing, Mies van der Rohe, less is more, all this stuff. Others will say, well, hang on, yeah, less is important, but you can go too less, too simple, and then it becomes meaningless. We have a tendency across the board, when we think about developing goal statements, vision statements, things like this, the first thing we do is we go really abstract and teeny. We got to be able to write it on our little finger. Otherwise, it's not a good vision. That's terrific if you've got a very good concrete picture that lies underneath it. Right? Otherwise, that slogan is very difficult to give meaning to, particularly when you want to put it in action. Because you're going to have a different meaning of it. You're going to have a different meaning of it. That's the second one. The third one, of course, is the Cheshire Cat, which I love. George Harrison wrote a song with that. My Southern sociologist friend used to say this all the time. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And you can add to it, you're probably not going to be satisfied when you arrive. Okay? All of these, we have fun with some quotes and we laugh a little bit. But this is serious. I mean, if we really want to make headway to do something, we need to figure out what the heck we're talking about and be able to see some concrete manifestations of it. Does that make sense? Okay, terrific. So I just went through that one. Let's skip that one. Okay. As we get into this, let me say a couple of things up front. One is, and you know this in living your lives, in families, to all the mothers out there, happy Mother's Day, in your relationship with your partner or spouse, in your relationship with your children, in the care of those relationships. You know it's messy. You know it's ambiguous. You know it's error-prone. You know there are no scripts. You know there's some general principles of practice, ways you ought to proceed, but there's no kind of minute level best practices. There really are. You also know you're going to screw up. You just have to admit that. But you have to be able to learn from it. You have to be able to give people grace. People have to be able to give you grace if we're going to make this caring thing really work. Then, of course, the thing we learned over 5+ years is that you can develop caring and you can develop community. You can develop a caring community from a group of very nice, friendly people. You could form a community around those folks. So it's possible. It really, really is possible. And it's glorious when it happens. I'll show you some examples, very concrete examples in just a few minutes of what caring community could look like. But let's go back to think about caring. We thought this was going to be easy. You know? What's caring? We use the word all the time. Well, no. When you write as an academic, you always want to have sources that you can attribute your stuff to, right? I mean, or you can put it out there without any kind of background and get shot down. And it won't be very credible to your readers. So we went looking for definitions of caring and we thought, wow, there are a lot of different ways to think about caring out there. A lot of different ways. So I bring 3 of them to you. These are 3 that we kind of settled in. One way to think about caring is that we care about things. You know what I mean by that? Priscilla, I care about you. I do. Sincerely, I'm using this example. I do care about you. I care about the poor. I care deeply about this congregation. You get what I'm saying? I care. If I am a teacher, I care deeply about my kids. Right? All right, so that's one way to look at it. It's a sort of a disposition, an orientation of concern for something. Great. It's essential, but where does it take you? Caring about something doesn't require you to do anything. I can care all the day long about the poor and do nothing. Important idea, right? It's really important to care about things. We thought, great, it's not enough. A second meaning we found out there was the giving of care, or helping, right? So, a nurse will turn a bedridden patient. It's an example of care. The nurse gives care to that patient by turning the patient. The teacher makes possible a kid to find a pair of eyeglasses. That's giving of care. Right? You get the idea of that? But man, haven't you all seen examples where care can be given in either a caring or an uncaring manner? Think about that nurse who goes in to turn a bedridden patient. Ugh. Flip. Ugh. And walks out. I'm exaggerating. I don't think a nurse would do that and keep the job. But you know. Or, and I don't mean to go close to home here, and I'm not referring to you at all. But the pastoral call to one's home that just feels and is performed in a perfunctory manner. The care is given. But there's more, right? Tell you a story when I was a kid, maybe 7th grade, something like that. It doesn't snow often in Richmond, Virginia. When it does, the kids are out. They want to have a ball. So in 7th grade, you're with your, Beavis and Butthead friends and you're the guys. And it snowed and we were all huddled together, the guys, and the girls were huddling over there. And we thought, boy, what a great idea would it be to join wrists like this, right? Hold like this, form a line, and just run and knock them all down like holy hands. Isn't that a great idea? So we did. We took off, and just as we were about ready to knock them down, Jessica Regelson turns her head, and her head hits my nose and bends it flat to my face. The blood goes flying. And, here I am, just terrified. To the emergency room I go. I didn't realize this for years, and, thinking about this example. So I go in, and this doctor comes, I'm sitting on the examination table, and he comes to me and just starts talking to me in a very calm, quiet way. All right, I'm 7th grade, I'm a boy, I'm terrified. I've seen what my face looks like, right? Blood all over the place, nose, didn't he do a good job? But, no, he didn't. Nose flapped against the face. And very gently, he starts to touch my nose. Okay? Just talking to me in a very calming way. And can't you kind of feel it? The gentle touch? And then all of a sudden he goes, okay? And then pushes my head between my knees so I don't faint. All right? And I thought, oh my God. And then I realized that he had reset my nose in the most caring way he could. Right? A terrified 7th grader who just was horrified by looking at his own face. If he had said, now Mark, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to feel for just the right spot, and then I'm going to count to 3, and then I'm going to rip your nose back into place. Okay, you up for that? And then I hear 1, 2. Let's say that's an uncaring way to give help. So we were trying to get inside of this. What does it mean to be caring in that way? And we sort of focused in on, when you combine caring about, giving care, all of that, you live in a caring relationship where you have to pay attention to the matter, the kind of care, the manner in which it is delivered, and the motivation. Why you do it the way you do it. And those 3 things, not to diminish the importance of caring about or giving care, but paying attention to the matter, the manner, and the motivation of caring is absolutely crucial. So it's really kind of, when we think about the meaning of it, we think of it as a bundle. Of course you help, of course you care about, but you need to direct your behavior in terms of manner, motivation, and manner. So when we think about this, of course, academics have to draw pictures of everything, so simplify things. And so this is kind of what we came up with. We wanted to try to figure out what are the elements that we have to consider when we think about matter, manner, and motivation. What are the things that kind of have to be in the stew of action and interaction that's caring? And so we came across a couple of things, and I'll unpack this in just a moment. But the purposes, your aims of caring are huge. So are the kinds of virtues and mindsets that you bring to the enterprise. We'll look at a list in just a second. But things like empathy, compassion, kindness, trustworthiness. These are the sorts of things. Certain kinds of mindsets, like humility, being open, inquisitiveness, right? Coupled with what you know about the one cared for, the context, your skills of communication. These variety of things come together in a wonderful stew that lead to what we call competent and reflective action. Competent meaning it has some basis and you do it with some kind of skill, but reflective in that you're always open to the responses of the other person, right? And adjusting all the time. You're reflective of your own, what you bring. what your own actions and interactions may be perceived to be by the other. It's kind of cool. And a little more complicated, but here's, you know, the aim, some of the aims. It all goes down to promoting the well-being and the thriving of others. That's the bottom line here. That's your driving motivation, is to pursue that aim of the well-being and the betterment of others. I mean, it's perfectly consistent, Phil, with what the big sort of target is that comes through in the commandments and in the words of the prophets. Help other people grow, provide help, and devote further caring. All of these things are important purposes, reasons why we do this. But always think about the betterment of others. What are some virtues and mindsets that seem to be important? Well, there are a bunch of them. They're all kind of fall under this idea of positive virtues and mindsets, in other words, tied to the well-being of others. But these lists should be familiar to you. We all understand the importance of love and kindness, compassion, empathy, authenticity, all of these things. And so, of course, we all know and share common understanding of what all these mean, right? No. We have to unpack them, and they're not unproblematic. But that's okay. This is something that really is community, which we'll get to, is that we kind of have to share some sort of common understanding about what empathy is. What do we mean in this community by compassion? Let me just give you an example of kind of how tricky it is with the example of empathy. We speak about empathy a lot, but it differs in a number of ways. We do hold empathy, say we do for individuals and groups, for near and far, but we know it's much easier to be empathetic to people who are in our immediate relationship than big groups or people far away. I can feel much more empathetic about the low-income person that I see every day, or that I hire to mow my lawn or something like that, than I am for the tens of thousands of poor people who exist in some community far, far, far away. Empathy doesn't require action. I can feel like I understand other people, but that doesn't really take me anywhere. I've got to couple it with something else, right? Like compassion. And interestingly, there was this great article in the Times the other day titled "The Dark Side of Empathy," arguing that the success of people like Donald Trump and Elon Musk is due to the fact that they're both extremely empathetic. They understand really well what different groups of people want and what their experiences are, and they're able to capitalize on that in very important and influential ways. Donald Trump has tapped into some things that lever remarkable political influence. Elon Musk has levered into the kind of imagination and creativity that people have of going to Mars, for example, right? But has begun to act on it in ways that one typically doesn't associate with empathy. There's an interesting argument that they've read other people really, really well. So empathy, it's an interesting argument that empathy doesn't always lead to the kind of positive outcomes you want. Again, you got to couple it with something else. The other thing, some of these virtues can be really overwhelming, kind of paralyzing. To really understand what other persons are going through, what they're thinking, can be debilitating. All right, I just put this out there because these virtues are often not as simple as we think they are. Okay. So there are all kinds of knowledge and skills we can talk about. Let me just introduce you to a couple of them that I think are particularly important. And that goes to something, a theme that we found over and over and over and over again. It's extremely difficult to care for someone, to be caring of someone, if you don't know who that person is. If you don't know who that person is authentically, if you don't know what interests, needs, projects that person has, you don't know what problems, you don't know the context in which they live, it's very hard to be effectively caring of them. So a lot of the knowledge and skills that we associate with caring have to do with learning about the other on a continual basis. And if we don't know each other pretty well, I mean, it's kind of obvious. It's very hard for us to be helpful or to be caring of if, Susan, I don't know you very well. I mean, I do some, and I'd love to get to know you more, but you all get the point, right? So there are these whole series of knowledge and skills that have come to play that are important. Sort of things about how we communicate with individuals, how we communicate with groups, all can be important here as well. We mentioned before, kind of mixing all those things up and then acting upon them in some competent ways and reflective ways. We've touched upon that just a little bit, in that you really want to be open to the responses of your actions and interactions, and you want to learn from them. Sometimes when you are in caring relationship with someone, you'll know you want that pitch back. You've said something that you know is not going to land as soon as it leaves your mouth. You should be reflective and thoughtful about that and be open to learn. There's much more we can say about this next week as well, as we think about how to kind of cultivate these things. So one last thing about caring that I think is important. This thing. Well, one thing about caring, another theme that came through over and over and over again, is that we're not talking about a discrete element of human relationship. We're not. It's like we have this element of relationship, this element, and here's caring down here. Caring is a bright through line, a quality, a property that runs through every aspect of a relationship. And organizationally, it runs through everything the organization does. It runs through everything that leadership does. It's not a discrete domain of it. It is a quality, a property of how we live with one another. And that, boy, when that kind of sunk in, that was huge. It's so important and so frightening at the same time. Right? But in many ways, it's going through life in our relationships, just not thinking about myself, but it's always thinking of having you and you, this place, but in mind. Okay? Let's turn quickly to community. So, these are fun questions. I just shared them with you a little bit. Would love if we had a few more minutes to get into them with you, but, you know, you can live on several blocks of houses, right? That's one thing. But do those houses, do the people in them constitute a community? What's the difference? Well, it's a tough question to answer, but you know, you feel the difference, right? Or a body of individuals who are members of a church, and that church is a congregational community. Maybe this is Potter Stewart all over again. I can't tell you what it is, but if I walked into a church for the first time, you get a sense really quick of whether you've walked into a community or just a bunch of good-hearted individuals. Does that make sense? So if you think about those questions that way, then you get to thinking about community. There's really this strong sense of interrelatedness that is developed, that is born of all these shared things. That we share understanding, our values, our commitments. We engage in common activity to achieve shared aims. We develop positive relationships that are characterized by trust, respect, meeting needs. And community is defined by this kind of sense of collective identity. In other words, you just need to think about the word we. Okay? The we that defines a group of people, an organization, a congregation. What is the we that we gravitate around and that we promote through our relationships with others? This sort of elevates caring from a dyadic thing that you and I do with one another because we like each other and, you know, all this thing. It elevates us to this, particularly when we think about what makes a community care. is that caring is that breakthrough line, among perhaps others, that holds it all together. You see what I mean? Community itself is a content-neutral concept. It doesn't tell you what values, it doesn't tell you what ideals, it doesn't tell you what activities or purposes, and quite frankly, those could be not so good. Right? People can cohere around lots of stuff. To be a caring community, people have to cohere around caring. Around the aims of caring, around the virtues, the mindsets, to share the knowledge and skills. It permeates everything a community is and does. It's a state of being. It's the we. So this is kind of where we ended up as we were thinking about how do we define a community of care. Now, I want to go through, I want to focus on this, and if you have just a couple of, we're about at 10:30, I'd like to read you a couple of short things, just to give you some sense of what so defined a community of care could actually look like if we were to put it into action. What we won't have time to do today is a little exercise that I've developed for you of trying to identify what could be going on in terms of action and interaction in a church congregation that you just hear about, right? You walk into it. What do you see? What do you hear? If it's a caring place or one where caring is not so strong. And we'll start off with that next time. But let me read you a couple of stories here. And the first one we mentioned last time, but you all know the theme song to Cheers, right? And you know, what happens when Norm walks into the bar each time he walks in? What happens? Norm! Everybody stops what they're doing, looks up and says, Norm! Okay, and then he's gruff, he walks in like that. Everybody's paying attention to Norm. They stop what they're doing. The theme song to Cheers is really quite lovely as a sort of a vision of a caring community. Making your way in the world today takes everything you've got. Taking a break from all your worries should help a lot. Wouldn't you like to get away? Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name and they're always glad you came. You want to be where you can see our troubles are all the same. You want to be where everybody knows your name. You can build on this. There's another one. This one comes from a story in one of the books that we did of stories. This is what a principal is telling an assembly of incoming ninth graders in a high school in a low-income community, where in most schools, these kids, not all these kids graduate, in fact, rather small proportions of kids graduate from high school. But this is what he tells this incoming class. I picked a selection. All the teachers are there, everybody is there. He writes, we know that there will be good days and bad days. We'll be there for both. If you're not getting to school in the morning, or if you start falling behind, I'm going to stay on you, and your teachers will stay on you. And I hope your classmates will stay on you, and you will stay on them. Before this week, I gave your teachers an assignment. Make me a lighthouse. Lighthouse is a symbol of the school. In ancient times, the lighthouse has been a symbol of hope. When sailors would be out at sea, they would look out and see the beam of the lighthouse and know where the coast was. And the beam could help them avoid danger and get them home safely. Together, we're going to be a lighthouse for each other, to keep each other on course, to rescue each other if we get too close to the rocks. And in 4 years, we will all be together on that stage at graduation, and no one will graduate alone. And then from my new favorite conservative columnist in the New York Times, David French. I don't know if you saw this, to embrace a resurrection faith, choose a love your neighbor church. Did you all see that one? Man, I said, I've got to share this with the class. So he speaks a bit about the difference between, I can't remember the other one, but the love your neighbor church.
Fear the world.
Love the world.
Fear the
Oh,
world.
fear the world, love your neighbor.
This seems to be-
Okay, so he tells a story about a church he used to attend in rural Kentucky. He says, you experience a love your neighbor church in a moment like I experienced in a small church in Kentucky. One Sunday evening, our pastor was preaching about the prodigal son, Jesus' parable about a young, ungrateful man who left his home, squandered his fortune, and returned home completely broken, expecting to face anger and retribution, only to be greeted by a father who ran to him, embraced him, and declared, "My son was dead. He is alive again. He was lost and is found." The pastor concluded his sermon with an altar call. "Some of you here are dead," he says. "You're lost in a life you don't want, but you can live again." It was a simple call, one that pastors have made countless times in countless churches. Often they're ignored, the congregation sings its final song and files out, but this time someone answered. From the back of the church, a young man, I'm not choked up on this, young man choked out a single word, "Pastor." It sounded like a question, as if he was asking for permission to come forward. When we looked back to see who'd spoken, I heard a gasp. The young man was a deacon's son who had abandoned his faith long ago. He'd become angry and violent. He bullied kids in the church's youth group. It was shocking that he'd even shown up in church. But he said it again, choking out the same word in between his sobs, "Pastor." And then he came forward, but not in the usual way. Usually a person steps out into the aisle and walks forward, but not this person. He was so desperate to go forward that he stepped over the backs of the pews. And when he got to the altar, it wasn't just the pastor who greeted him, but many of the kids he bullied. They had left their pews when he did. They were waiting for him at the front of the church. They all embraced him. And at that moment, I watched a person come back to life. We spoke last week about the power of stories. This is pretty dang powerful. But what this does is it helps us define in very real terms what we might like a community of faith or a caring community of faith to mean for us. In the stories we tell and the stories we see. This would be a pretty terrific characteristic of a caring community at First United. Maybe we don't have altar calls, but you get the idea, right? And if you have that idea in mind, it's much easier to know what you want to cultivate and how you want to cultivate it and how you know you're making progress when you have these very concrete ways of thinking. So with that, I think we'll bring it to a close, and let's start next session with that exercise, and it'll be fun. It won't take too long. It'll be like a little, speed dating thing on your card. Just you write down a few ideas as you go.
You want to
Thank-
ask about 9?
Oh yes, thank you. Would you all be up for starting at 9:30 next week? Would that work okay? Okay, and we're down, that'd be terrific. And those who can't really make it right at 9:30, come as soon as you can. We'll be downstairs again, right, Dan? All right. Thank you all so much for being here. Look forward to seeing you again next week. Phil, thank you very much.
Thank you.